What if I told you that right now, as you are watching this video, there is a very high chance that your body is missing one critical vitamin, and because of that, cancer cells inside your body are surviving when they should be dying? I know that sounds alarming. I know it sounds dramatic. But stay with me, because what I am about to share with you today is not a theory, not a trend, and not something invented by the wellness industry. This is peer-reviewed science, published in some of the most respected medical journals in the world, and most doctors, including many of my colleagues, are still not talking about it enough. My name is Dr. Thomas Morgan, and today I want to talk to you about the forgotten vitamin, the one that your body desperately needs, the one that most of you are deficient in, and the one that researchers have now directly linked to something called apoptosis, which is the scientific word for when cancer cells are literally commanded to kill themselves. Yes, you heard that right. There is a vitamin that tells cancer cells to destroy themselves from the inside, and most of you watching this right now are not getting enough of it. So please, do not scroll away. Watch this until the very end, because this information could genuinely change or even save your life. Let me start with a patient story because I think it will help you understand exactly why I am so passionate about this topic. About 4 years ago, a woman named Margaret came to see me. She was 54 years old, a school teacher, one of those people who always seemed full of energy and warmth. She had started feeling tired, not the normal tired that you feel after a long day, but a deep, bone-level exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. She was getting sick constantly. Every cold, every flu, it seemed to find her. She had muscle aches that she attributed to aging. She had low mood, almost a quiet sadness that she couldn't explain. And then, most concerning, she had her routine screening and received news that no one ever wants to hear. Early-stage abnormal cells were detected. Not yet a confirmed cancer, but the kind of finding that puts every doctor on high alert. When we ran a full panel of blood work, one number stood out immediately. Her vitamin D level, specifically 25-hydroxyvitamin D, was at 14 nanograms per milliliter. For reference, optimal health requires a level of at least 40 to 60 nanograms per milliliter. Margaret was less than one-third of where she needed to be. She had been severely deficient for years, and she had no idea. We corrected her deficiency, we monitored her closely, and over the following months, those abnormal cells did not progress. Her immune system woke up. Her energy returned. Her follow-up screening came back significantly improved. Now, I am not standing here telling you that vitamin D cures cancer. I am not saying that. What I am telling you is that the science behind what happened with Margaret, the science behind why her body responded the way it did, is one of the most important and underappreciated stories in modern medicine. So let's talk about what vitamin D actually is, because most people have a very incomplete picture of it. When you hear the word vitamin, you probably think of something you swallow in a little tablet. But vitamin D is not really a vitamin in the traditional sense. It is actually a steroid hormone. Yes, a hormone. It behaves like one, it functions like one, and it has receptors, called vitamin D receptors, or VDRs, in virtually every single cell in the human body. Think about that for a moment. Your heart cells have vitamin D receptors, your brain cells have them, your immune cells have them, and yes, your cells that are vulnerable to becoming cancerous, they have vitamin D receptors too. This means vitamin D is not just doing one job. It is not just building bones, which is what most people learned in school. Vitamin D is communicating with nearly every system in your body simultaneously. It is like a master switch. When the switch is on, your body runs properly. When the switch is off, when you are deficient, entire systems begin to malfunction in ways that often go unnoticed for years, sometimes decades. Now here is where this gets truly remarkable, and I want you to pay close attention to this part, because this is the heart of everything I am going to tell you today. Inside your body, every single day, cells are dividing. That is normal. That is how the body repairs itself. But sometimes, a cell mutates. Something goes wrong during the division process. A cell starts behaving abnormally, growing when it shouldn't, ignoring the body's stop signals. Under healthy conditions, the body has a built-in mechanism for dealing with these rogue cells. It is called apoptosis. Apoptosis is essentially programmed cell death. It is the body's way of recognizing a damaged or dangerous cell and commanding it to self-destruct. It is one of the most elegant and important processes in the entire human body. When apoptosis works correctly, potentially cancerous cells are eliminated before they can become a real problem. The body quietly handles the threat, and you never even know it happened. Here is the critical problem. Vitamin D is one of the most important activators of apoptosis. Without adequate vitamin D, this self-destruct mechanism becomes sluggish. It becomes inconsistent. And the rogue cells that should be dying, they keep surviving. They keep dividing. And over time, unchecked, that is how a small problem becomes a very large one. A landmark study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that women who supplemented with vitamin D and calcium reduced their overall cancer risk by as much as 77% compared to women who received a placebo. 77%. That is not a small number. That is not a rounding error. That is a statistically significant, peer-reviewed result that should have made front-page news everywhere. Another study, published in PLOS One, looked at vitamin D blood levels in cancer patients and found that patients with higher levels of vitamin D at the time of their diagnosis consistently had better survival outcomes and slower disease progression. The cancer did not disappear because of vitamin D, but the body's ability to fight it was dramatically stronger. Researchers have also identified specific mechanisms through which vitamin D does this. It activates genes that suppress tumor growth. It reduces angiogenesis, which is the process by which tumors build their own blood supply to feed themselves. Without a blood supply, a tumor cannot grow. Vitamin D helps block that process. It also modulates inflammation, which is critically important because chronic low-grade inflammation is now recognized as one of the primary environmental conditions in which cancer thrives. And of course, it triggers apoptosis. It literally turns on the genes that tell a damaged cell to eliminate itself. All of these actions happen at the molecular level quietly, every day, in a body that has enough vitamin D. And none of them happen efficiently in a body that doesn't. Now I need to tell you something about how widespread this deficiency actually is, because the statistics here are genuinely shocking. According to data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, approximately 42% of American adults are vitamin D deficient. Some researchers, when using stricter cutoff levels for optimal health rather than just the bare minimum, estimate that number is closer to 70 or even 80% of the population. Globally, the World Health Organization estimates that over 1 billion people are vitamin D insufficient. 1 billion people. And the groups at highest risk are people who spend most of their time indoors, which in the modern world is almost everyone. People with darker skin tones, because melanin reduces the skin's ability to synthesize vitamin D from sunlight. Older adults, because the aging body becomes less efficient at producing and processing the vitamin. Overweight individuals, because vitamin D is fat-soluble and gets sequestered in fat tissue where the body cannot use it effectively. And people living in northern latitudes, where the sun angle for much of the year is simply not strong enough to trigger vitamin D synthesis in the skin at all. Here is something that surprises most people when I tell them this in the office. You cannot get meaningful amounts of vitamin D from food alone. Unlike most vitamins, vitamin D is not naturally abundant in the food supply. Fatty fish like salmon and mackerel have some. Egg yolks have a small amount. Some foods are fortified with it, like milk and certain cereals. But the amounts are modest. To get even 1000 IU of vitamin D from food, you would need to eat several servings of fatty fish every single day. It is simply not practical, and it is why sunlight and supplementation are the two main ways the body gets what it needs. And before you say it, yes, I know some of you are thinking, well, I go outside, I get sun. I hear this all the time. But let me ask you a few questions. Are you wearing sunscreen? SPF 30 reduces vitamin D synthesis by about 97%. Are you wearing long sleeves and pants? That eliminates most skin exposure. Are you going outside between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., which is the only window in which UVB rays are at the right angle to trigger vitamin D synthesis? And even if you are doing everything right, if you live above the 35th parallel, which includes most of the United States, Canada, all of Europe, and many other parts of the world, from approximately October through March, the sun simply does not rise high enough in the sky for UVB rays to reach your skin at all. The winter sun feels warm, it does not feel dangerous, but it also does not produce vitamin D in your body. None. So regardless of what you think your sun exposure is like, there is a very real possibility that your levels are not where they should be. This is why the first thing I recommend to every patient who comes through my door, before we talk about anything else, is to get their vitamin D levels tested. It is a simple blood test. It costs very little, and the information it gives you is invaluable. Now, let me tell you about the other ways vitamin D deficiency manifests in the body beyond the cancer risk, because I want you to understand just how many symptoms might be connected to this one issue that most people completely overlook. Chronic fatigue and low energy are among the most common early signs. The cells in your body use vitamin D to produce energy at a mitochondrial level. The mitochondria are essentially the power stations of your cells. Without enough vitamin D, those power stations underperform. You feel it as exhaustion, brain fog, and that heavy, dragging feeling that coffee doesn't fix. Depression and low mood are strongly associated with vitamin D deficiency. Several studies have found that people with deficiency are significantly more likely to experience depression and anxiety, and that correcting the deficiency can meaningfully improve mood in many patients. Frequent infections, because vitamin D is essential for producing the antimicrobial peptides that your immune cells use to destroy pathogens, chronic muscle and joint pain, hair loss, poor wound healing, and perhaps most quietly dangerous of all, the increased risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and yes, multiple types of cancer. Colorectal cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer, all of these have been associated in multiple large-scale studies with low vitamin D status. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence I find is something called the latitude gradient in cancer rates. Researchers noticed decades ago that populations living farther from the equator, where sun exposure is lower, consistently have higher rates of certain cancers than populations living closer to the equator. When researchers controlled for diet, lifestyle, and other variables, the difference in vitamin D synthesis from sunlight remained one of the most consistent explanatory factors. The sun is not just giving you warmth and a good mood. For most of human evolution, it was our primary source of one of the most powerful cancer-fighting substances our bodies can access. So what do you actually do with this information? I want to give you clear, practical guidance here because I never want you to leave one of my videos without something you can actually act on. The very first step is to find out where your levels are. Ask your doctor for a 25-hydroxyvitamin D blood test. This is the correct test, not 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D, which measures something different. When you get your results, understand that many labs will tell you anything above 20 nanograms per milliliter is normal. I disagree with that interpretation for most people. Most integrative and functional medicine physicians and increasingly mainstream researchers consider 40 to 60 nanograms per milliliter to be the optimal range for disease prevention and immune health. Below 30 is insufficient. Below 20 is genuinely deficient. Know your number. Second, if you are deficient, work with your doctor on a supplementation protocol. For most adults with confirmed deficiency, doses between 2,000 and 5,000 IU of vitamin D3 per day are commonly used, but the right dose for you depends on your individual level, your body weight, and other factors. Please do not just pick a random dose from the internet. Get tested, supplement appropriately, and retest in 3 to 6 months to confirm your levels are rising. Vitamin D toxicity is real. It is rare, but it is real. And it only happens when people take very high doses without monitoring. When done correctly and with appropriate oversight, vitamin D supplementation is extremely safe. Third, and this is important, always take vitamin D3 alongside vitamin K2. This is something most people do not know. K2 helps ensure that the calcium mobilized by vitamin D is directed into your bones and teeth where it belongs, and not deposited into your arteries and soft tissues where it causes harm. The two work synergistically. You also want to take vitamin D with a meal that contains some healthy fat, olive oil, avocado, nuts, because as I mentioned, it is a fat-soluble vitamin and absorbs best in the presence of dietary fat. Fourth, try to get sensible, unprotected sun exposure when the conditions are right. I am not telling you to burn. I am telling you that 15 to 30 minutes of midday sun on your arms and legs a few times per week when the conditions allow for UVB synthesis is genuinely beneficial. and is the most natural way for your body to acquire this vitamin. Balance this with common sense about sun safety. You are not trying to tan. You are trying to give your body a brief, productive exposure. And fifth, eat a generally anti-inflammatory diet because vitamin D works synergistically with many other nutrients. Magnesium, in particular, is required for the conversion of vitamin D into its active form in the body. Many people are also deficient in magnesium, which means even if they are taking vitamin D supplements, their body cannot fully activate it without adequate magnesium. Dark leafy greens, pumpkin seeds, almonds, and whole grains are all good sources of magnesium. The body is not a collection of isolated systems, it is an interconnected network, and your nutrition strategy needs to reflect that. I want to come back to Margaret for just a moment, because her story does not end with the one finding I mentioned earlier. After 2 years of optimal vitamin D levels, after better sleep, consistent anti-inflammatory eating, and appropriate exercise, Margaret sat across from me in my office and said something I will never forget. She said, "Dr. Morgan, I feel better at 56 than I did at 46. I feel like my body is actually working again." That is what happens when you give the body what it needs to do its job. That is what happens when you stop ignoring a deficiency that most people don't even know they have. The forgotten vitamin is not mysterious, it is not expensive, it is not inaccessible. What it is underappreciated and consistently undermeasured. The science is there, the research is compelling, the mechanism is understood. All that remains is for people to actually act on the information. I hope that today's video is the moment you decide to act. If there is one thing I want you to take away from everything I have shared today, it is this. Cancer does not happen overnight, and the protection against it does not happen overnight either. It is built day by day through the choices you make and the deficiencies you correct. Getting your vitamin D levels tested is one of the simplest, most affordable, and most potentially impactful things you can do for your long-term health right now, not next month. Now, and as always, please do not try to self-treat serious health concerns without working alongside a qualified medical professional who knows your full history. What I share here is education. Your individual care requires an individual conversation with your own physician, but going into that conversation informed, knowing what questions to ask, knowing what numbers to request, that changes everything. If this video was useful to you, if it gave you something you didn't know before, please take 2 seconds and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this information reach more people who need it. And if you are not already subscribed to this channel, please do that now. Every week I bring you honest, research-backed health information explained in plain language, because I believe that understanding your own health should not require a medical degree. Share this video with someone you love, a parent, a spouse, a friend. You never know whose life a single piece of information might change. And in the next video, I am going to be talking about something that is directly connected to today's topic, the hidden inflammation in your body that you cannot feel, that is silently increasing your risk of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer simultaneously, and exactly what you can do about it. You do not want to miss that one. I will see you there. Take care of yourself because your health is the most valuable thing you own.